could also say one of the great joys of screen painting is, in a way, it hooks up to my sense of the brilliance of, abstract expressionism, that notion of spontaneity and bareness and that moment. If anybody has done silk screen, you would know that magic moment of the screen lifting. You could imagine that image, you could imagine to kingdom come, but until that screen actually lifts, you see that image for the first time, it is magic. It either works or it doesn't. And that's also the thrill of abstract expression. The risk, the so-called risk of abstract expression. So there is the risk. And that's also why I use the silk screen.
It's a very central thing because there's an auditory component to that too as the screen comes up.
There's a whoosh.
Yes, exactly. And you're in mesh, you're involved with fumes, so you're a bit high at the time.
No, I'm just standing on the side. I'm doing it.
Yeah.
So I rather enjoy the leisure. Ever since we've had Moholy-Nagy ordering and painting, I'm still very craft-based. I'm still very hands-on. Using the silk screen and its technicians allow me this sense of noblesse, if you will. I could be sitting back.
One of your qualities that I really love is this almost reverse sense of elegance.
There again, I can't see.
And that's what we're going to force you because you've got this idea of these images against the ground, and one can look at them from distance or in reproduction and see something aligned with page layout, a graphic design. And you have a work like this, which is recounting the chronicle of Barnett Newman's canvases out with the shapes and the scale, all done to scale. It's a diagram, and yet it's a painting. A simple image on a ground, kind of a layout, but still a painting.
Well, we could talk forever about, is it a painting?
Is it a painting?
Well, it is a painting.
And how does that work for you? Because this is like throughout your body of work. You're from 74 onwards, you're playing with this idea. If it's an idea, let's call it a whole spectrum of visual culture rather than just the round.
Well, I benefit greatly from the visual material, rich source. Deliberate, somebody really put their heart and mind into putting that into place. And I value it a lot. I love that guy who reproduces jumping colors against Marty Patel. There's so many people. And not even work. I would go to the certain shop and they would be working on facsimile size book jacket covers. And there was a print of Richard Hamilton I really wanted. It was like, he just did the cover of Ulysses or something as a work. The first edition. Maybe it wasn't the first edition. So that is something I've learned from. I employ quite often. I love book jacket covers and the whole culture of design. This is where we have a lot of connection because you were very involved in design. And it was someone like Lochenko who really led the way for me. I wanted to be a high artist, I didn't want to deal with the low. But once again, I was forced.
I want to come back to that. You were talking about that kind of elegance and the tension between, on the one hand, this idea of spontaneity and chaos in the work, and then the really cool side of it, the detached, rational side of it. And this is where I think the piece of Many Squares is quite interesting, which references to Schwab's 1925 poster of the chess tournament, which he achieved by tossing building blocks in a bag and taking a photo of them. And so maybe we can
Oh,
return to that.
you discovered
I
it.
discovered it after you told me.
Yeah.
I did my homework.
He's done his homework. That's great.
I got it.
Yes, well, that particular painting, I'm very lucky you dragged it out. Magda came a year ago and happened to have a peek of it with rags. I hadn't looked at it since '89 when we came back from a couple of museums in Europe. In fact, when we unwrapped it, it was double wrapped, and I think we've got enough plastic to buy paintings for that one. That particular one is called Of Many Squares. And by the way, when you see these paintings, this is really like just a selection. Behind them is like a series. Behind them are other works using the same image in other colors and scales. So in the case of Many Squares, it was my way of finishing off a group of work about squares. The first of which was to use the book jacket cover of Liszewski's Of Two Squares, canonical book, mind you, in terms of design history, where he basically had the red square, the black square, metaphors for the forces of progressiveness and the forces of conservatism, reaction, and how in the end the red square wins and it's a brand new world, blah, blah, blah. But anyway, this cover of Liszewski's book, Of Two Squares, everyone who takes 101 design exposed to. So I took that, presented it as the way it is, reproduced it in some way, and then had a red square and a green square, and juxtaposed the red square with the word berg and the green square with bear. And of course, my point was Clement Greenberg and Rosenberg were sort of squares. And having done that, I said, well, you know, that's feeling just something very historical. Everyone knows about how it falls. I said, and I came across a Russian book, the title of which was October in the Cube. So there was a good way to get at Rosalind. Of Many Squares, then I said, well, you know, we're all squares. So this poster served me dramatic. I'm sorry, I'm kind of literal. In fact, the word poetry is a no-no word in my lexicon, even though I have a beautiful book jacket designed by Lachenko of poetry, Mayakovsky.
These little indexes throughout your work and unraveling it through this commentary, I mean, that's what I find fascinating.
You share in that approach.
But also because it is so hidden.
Why is it hidden?
It's
I mean it to be upfront.
It's upfront, but you know, there's something else about it. If it's upfront, then maybe we can do another loop around that. It says that it's hidden, constantly returning to the problem. As if, you know, you're always on the threshold. You never quite going to step over it.
Always the bridesmaid, never the bride.
Which makes the a kind of an interesting position, but an historical one as well. It's not necessarily entirely of your own making, but part of the consequence of where you have positions.
Oh, I want to give up responsibility as much as I can. That's the thrust of what I've been saying, I think. You know, long ago somebody said, you know, it's not the painter who paints, it's the painting that paints the painter. And that's certainly stuck in there somewhere.
And I think you could see that if you look at the series in their entirety. I mean, for example, how many works are behind this one red canvas?
Well, you know, I should mention, this is absolutely where my canvas falls. This is a recent painting. This particular group of work was begun in 1990. The catalog resume came out a few years ago and reordered the sequence of when the work was done. Some works were taken out, others were added. So the publication of the catalog resume forced me to re-enter the subject. And not that you would know unless you compare the two things side by side, but I was compelled to make this new version. The other thing that made me force my hand to do this is the earlier one of the paintings in scale, which was a very deep blue one, very, very rich, deep, like Barnett Newman's painting Ulysses. I mean, oftentimes the colors are color memory of particular paintings. Some collector had it and put it up at auction without a reserve. We're talking about a painting that's like 6.5 by 11 feet. It was estimated for like $60,000. It went for $7,000.
Oh, okay.
As a result, I had sales canceled because people would say, they could do it for me. Well, wait a minute, we checked his auction record, you know. So, one, I lost the painting, which I don't even know where, because Christie's and Sotheby's, they don't tell you who buys the painting. It's a secret, guarded secrets. So, okay, that's gone. I'm going to make another one because I'm plus I need to update, the information, which was the reason why I wanted to do this. So, anyway.
It's a really interesting history.
There's a wonderful art historian who I happen to get in contact with. She's actually writing a piece for a book in France. France is a great country and very supportive of my work. I'd like to acknowledge Bernard Pifarati, who is here, a wonderful painter from Paris. Not only do we go back some ways, but he very kindly invited me to be guest professor at ANSBA, which is the École des Beaux-Arts du Secondaire. And anyway,
The book.
the book, yes.
Historic.
This wonderful writer, her name is Alain Choutou. I'm sure many of you know. She worked very closely with Georges-Élie Huberman, who's a wonderful artist. Her point of entry with my work is she's calling me an artist. Basically, she thinks I'm doing art history by other means. And I accept that completely. I think that's a rich thing to explore.
This part of the materials of your work is part of the materials of other artists' work.
Exactly.
And how it figures in the dimension is the interesting story.
Well, just trying to make things interesting to yourself. Otherwise, it's hard to get out and do any work.
Should we take some questions?
Oh, yes, great. Yeah. Steve.
Michael and David, how do you feel about chronological specificity in terms of art movement? So is a geometric painting now commenting on a geometric painting then, or is there not a time difference?
There's definitely a time difference. I mean, go ahead.
Well, no. Collective.
Yeah. Well, this is why I stopped doing the geometrical paintings. In '74, I began working with some plane geometry forms, informed by Al and people like that. And I actually was trying to do something new with it. I tried to marry it to notions of spontaneity coming from abstract expressionism. Never making a small study and blowing it up, always doing it full scale, directly changing, editing. Every move is prima facie. After 10 years of doing it, I realized that the public's view of those paintings is, oh, these are updated, boring, abstract, geometrical paintings. You know, this is one of the points I think I try to make in my work, is you never get away from the ideological conventional reading in place. And this is why there are people who are now talking about, say, even when Greenberg, I'm talking about Saul's reference that he was telling me the other day, that Greenberg was the first to actually be a pictures artist. In the sense, the pictures artists are referring to and incorporating in what they present everything you know about that convention. And when an abstract painter is painting an abstract painting, that is always there. Maybe not, directly, but certainly in wings. There is no ground zero where meaning is waiting to be filled. The meaning is already in place. That's all you have to work with. This is the brilliance of abstract of appropriation. It acknowledges that. So for you to say what is different, it's never different. It's just that you're always at a particular mobile strip of history. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does, because if you look at that, in one sense, you're talking about the context that has become part of the meaning of this particular sign. And in that way, people will think of context as a kind of a straitjacket. In another sense, the dialogue is required to use the sign and retrieve it from, or liberate it from that context, is not about getting into some sort of prior meaning, but it's about instilling a different meaning in it. So you're absolutely right. It's about the choice of the artist and the means that you have at your disposal to show that transition and to show it convincingly. So, for example, I could conceive of a younger generation of artists without even the depth of historical knowledge that you're bringing to this, somehow fascinated by the idea of geometry. I mean, this also happened in the mid-60s when you had neo-geo coming in a certain way.
And I benefited from that renaissance.
So because you were sort of,
I got
you were orbiting it the other way. And then the idea is that what would it take for us to be convinced that this is a different kind of realization of geometry? Would it be a stylistic matter? Would it be something else? Would it be a kind of a wildness or even a willful sort of forgetting of the past? I mean, we sort of encountered this in terms of things.
Well, that's the old approach. Is you do, many artists approach making art with blinders on. It's useless in a teaching situation when you want to tell somebody that what they're doing has a connection with work that's been done. They want to pretend they invented the wheel.
Yeah, we see this all the time if you're involved in teaching. This happens, and in a way, I feel tremendously academic, terribly so, and really not doing the student a favor at all by pointing out all of the historical predecessors. What am I doing? Just sort of like showing what I know. And of course, that's not the point. That's not what they're doing. If they had the information, would they be a better artist for what's going on? And again, to get back to this realm of, say, freedom that you have by ignoring those kinds of references attached to conventional forms or images and so on, gives you somewhere to go. And yet, you don't want to stop the conversation because then you'll be somewhere. No, that's a foreign territory. Foreign territory. I'm just trying to imagine if any dialogue happens across generations.
We really should let other people speak. I'm sorry.
Yeah. I'm not here.
No. It's so easy.
I was on
I love the sound of our own voices. Not.
I'm interested in this, the role of photography in your work, David, because I think that one could, we're very different reading your work, which may not be to your taste or how you think about your work, but I think that you look at the role of the photograph in the composition and in the result of your work. I mean, these are essentially indices, right, from a catalog resume, or this actually, I think, could be called a photograph. Or it could be called a photograph, or I think that there would be certainly some curators who might put this in a photographic exhibition,
I see.
even, as a kind of, the painting as a ground for this, essentially like modernist photo. It's shown in its entirety, I can imagine. And then also like the Malevich paintings. And so I'm just curious, because coming from that background, I'm interested in how you think about photography, or as a tool or a result of a conclusion of the work.
I guess I haven't thought that closely vis-a-vis photography as photography. It's just within my purview. I'm surrounded by photographic images. Some of them are compelling enough for a particular reason. I employ them. Sometimes I even make an attempt to call attention to it as a photographic reference, as in the Glisman, that particular Glisman painting. They're actually almost illustrational of like black and white prints. I guess, artists do give themselves a lot of freedom. We take
But I think that one could actually, in terms of viewing, also take tremendous freedoms as well.
Well,
And
certainly.
how we consider
I don't, definitely, there's no prescriptive reading to these. In fact, I invite and hope to hear something new about my work that I haven't thought of before, that might animate and induce me for further work. So I have to think more about photography.
You talked about process earlier and how some of the earlier work were more process-oriented. What role does sort of process play in the work that we see here and in the future work that you're thinking of doing?
Well, I think there is a sense of time. If you look at the paintings, you realize they're not one shot. They have to be crafted. The problem with the earlier so-called process paintings is all they foregrounded and featured was the process. We used to talk about how process was important because the viewer could reconstitute every move we made and thereby inviting the viewer in as co-worker, co-producer of the work, all that stuff. But what if you want to talk about history? What if you want to talk about something narrative? It wasn't allowed under conversion models.
David, in that case, can you talk a bit about the role of the monochrome
Of the monochrome?
in your work? Yeah, the notion that if we peel away the silkscreen, we have these surfaces that you seem to deal with in a tender and loving manner.
Maybe it goes back to some idea of holism. That idea of whether it was in Pollock approaching the whole thing at once, notions of the field, notions.
But I'm much more interested in the choices of color. Sometimes I'm
From
always
saying
referential.
you do not compose, all those.
Yeah.
I mean, in many ways, everything I know is a receipt of
As I said.
theme.
And the colors were, colors are very evocative and metaphoric. They're never. I was at a an event in your studio about color. And I came off as the most romantic person there against
That's what leads to
Morris.
this question.
I spoke against the use of the Pantone.
Yes.
I may secretly use it. You know, it's a huge area. It's the very kind of, it's the uncontrollable part. It's, you know, everything else I can always control, but the particular color, it always surprises me. You know, I have an idea.
So it's the surplus.
It's always the same. This particular turquoise painting, my intent was to do a pure cobalt painting. And can you believe it? $600 worth of cobalt painting. So underneath it, it was mottled. You know, I want some, you know, I don't want a black uniform. I want some way of entering, but it was just too uncontrolled. So I ended up tinting coal, more money, you know, more coal. White is cheap. Which, by the way, you know, many of you may have seen the Richter film. You know, what got me really jealous was how much paint he could afford. Mixing that one group of paint that got pushed on a few $1,000.
So
Julie,
just that failure, if the silk screens fail, can you just paint over it, or is the whole canvas lost?
you know, I had ones I've thrown away, but you always try to save it. It's a salvage operation. Then you start justifying, wait a minute, what if I do something else to it? You know, I'm very parsimonious. You know, I don't like to waste material.
So how does color meet the subject matter or the subject matter?
How does color?
How does color meet the subject matter? And the other dimension, is it in meeting?
Well,
Transformation?
not so much in this one, but there's another version of this painting, which was mostly lavender and purple. And as I said before, color is always like, you know, metaphoric, but oftentimes at the level of language. And, you know, lavender evokes a kind of homosexual discourse. So that was very much why the painting ended up being purple. And in the case of the Newmans, well, you know, after he announced Who's Afraid of Red, Yellow, Blue, that entered the mix.
Did there will be a yellow one?
You know, I did a whole series of prints based on this idea. And it was actually red, yellow, blue. Bagel red on red ground, bagel blue on red, blue ground, and bagel yellow on yellow ground. And in the case of the Malevich, well, you know, in my mind, given the poverty of the October Revolution and that moment, they didn't have money for color. You know, all those posters from Russia were red, yellow, black. Red was like the only color. So I wanted to address the subject, constructivism, Malevich, so they almost had to be red, black.
So there's a continuation.
I mean, it's always a consideration, but not one that's like absolute. And I'm always looking for, you know, to be surprised by the color. This is what I talked to at Judd Foundation. And, you know, there is that element of seeing, this is the expression I've used before, the notion of seeing something as if for the first time.
David, you mentioned Lawrence Alloway briefly earlier, who had a and obviously quite conflicted relationship with Greenberg and his followers, as well as this, an interest in how paintings are received or dispersed, which I think in some respects, you share, I guess. You share some of these, maybe some of these preoccupations in terms of how paintings and artworks, specifically modernist artworks, are mediated and received, as well as having this quite conflicted relationship with, say, Greenberg and his followers. And I was just wondering what your relationship was with Alloway.
With Alloway, well,
yeah.
Very clearly. I first met him because I was hanging for him at the Guggenheim as the extra worker they would bring in for installations. My friend Jeff Way, a wonderful painter, has a regular job. So whenever they needed extra installers, I would be called in. I was lucky enough to help hang Barnett Newman's Stations of the Cross. Alloway was the curator. I got to meet him there. He was teaching a seminar at NYU. He allowed me to sit in on it. He actually came to my studio, and as a very young artist, I was 22 or something. I mean, for him, it may have been an easy way to get out of the studio, but he said, "Oh, first rate, first rate." So that's how I know Alan. And furthermore, I valued his attempt to not be under the hegemonic weight of the titans of the moment. He had a kind of independent voice. And I was very happy that Richard Kalina, recently, a year or two ago, collected his essays. So, is that enough to go for lunch on?